Hey, yo, turn it up as loud as it go. Come on, hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome.
This is Hill and Chill as Fuck the podcast. It's your boy Tristan Mitchell, licensed clinical social worker with Soco Ray Therapy.
And it's me, your girl, Socorro Reynoso, aka Soco Ray, owner of Soco Ray Therapy, licensed clinical social worker.
And this is Robin Dial, associate clinical social worker with Soco Ray Therapy and resident hip hop head with this therapy for us, by us. Hill and Chill as fuck podcast.
We in here, baby.
Let's get it. Let's get it. We are back for another episode.
That's my let's get it dance. Every time.
This is episode 6, and we are back in the building. I think we 6 weeks in. People probably know the flow, so we should just dive into it. What's in your mug? In your mug? What you got in your mug?
Before we talk about what's in our mug,
One day we'll have a mug.
I would like to set the record straight. First of all, the curls look really cool. I'm going to show you guys how the curls look without. Those of you on YouTube, do you see? Oh, now they're flat. The curls were popping with these headphones. I just don't like them, but we're just going to rock with it, okay? Mm-hmm. We recorded 3 brief episodes before we started really getting after it, and we thought that those first 3 recordings were going to be aired, and we decided not to air them. And what we neglected to address is the drinks that we have on this show. We're therapists, of course. We were like, that's gonna kind of create a little bit of a stir. We have to do it responsibly. And what we talked about in the first episode, it was brief, and today we'll dive in, or next time we'll dive in a little more, but is that we don't use it as a crutch. We only choose to drink when we feel good. It's to feel even better, not to feel better. So when we discuss these drinks, please know that we have done our work. We do not struggle with alcohol addiction. We use it to enhance goodness, and we apologize if it seemed as though we don't care about those who are struggling with this. We know that this is an issue for many. It's not our issue, so we don't bypass this source of fun for us. Joy.
That being said, let's rewind and take it back. What's in your mug? In your mug? What you got in your mug?
I have a paloma. Anybody know what a paloma is?
Go on and tell us.
Okay, so I just learned about this shit 2 summers ago. I was in Puerto Vallarta with my girlfriend, and we had, it was all inclusive, and homeboy kept bringing them, and I'm like, what is this? It's like the better, lighter version of a margarita. It is squirt. It is Cazadores tequila. You can use any tequila, but my favorite is Cazadores. And lime juice. And it's simple and it's easy. And so that's what we're drinking today. Mm-hmm. Cheers.
I love how that sounded. Cazadores.
Look, when your name is Socorro, you have to fucking say your Mexican words. You're not your Mexican words. Your Spanish words right. Those are not. I sound like those people I get mad at. It is not a Mexican word. It's a Spanish word. Anyway, if I didn't say words right and like my own name, if I call myself Socorro in front of my grandmother, or if I said tortilla, not even tortilla, I was called Chicana Falsa. So we have to say like, I don't know what, like quesadilla, Socorro, taco. Like I can't say fucking taco. I can't do it. Anyway, long story short, cheers to your paloma and to another episode.
Cheers. Man, we have survived another week. Another week.
Have. But it's been challenging. Mm-hmm. So the question I have for my 2 favorite therapists today that will then be reflected back to me is, tell me about a challenge you faced this week and what you did with it. So I'll start with Robin.
Ooh, challenges. I would say the challenge I faced this week, which I actually didn't even know was a challenge until probably it really hit me. August 22nd was the anniversary of my mom's passing. And I had noticed that I had been feeling, I don't know, I was super emotional, like a lot. And I didn't know why. Like, I was just like, oh, maybe my period's coming. Some hormonal stuff happening. I don't know. Life is ever changing and adjusting. And I was like, maybe I just had it with this damn COVID shit and I'm ready for it to get on. It might be a combination of that. But I think it was more of my grief response. It comes and goes. There's no particular time. It's not like clockwork, like every time around this time I feel sad or anything like that. Sometimes it's on her birthday, which passed in July 7th. So kind of like, it's all in close proximity with her passing. So, July 7th was her birthday. She passed on August 22nd. And then my birthday's coming up, September 9th, which was a really tough birthday for me after that. And also, I think I'm turning 40 September 9th. So I'm like, God damn it. Had all these plans.
Dreams for this birthday party.
Big dreams.
It's still gonna happen.
I'm telling everybody I'm not turning 40 until further notice. But, there's still...
Big dreams is an understatement.
Right? Oh, yeah.
About
Yeah.
to be lit.
Oh, yeah.
It's coming.
For sure. But, yeah, I just think a combination of all of that, experienced a lot of grief and loss, I think. And it really hit me hard this week to the point where I was, like, really emotional today. Crying my eyes out today. When I thought about it, I had a dream about my mom last night, and I just was like, ugh, I really miss her. And that was probably the straw for today. But it felt good. It felt so good to cry and let it out, and also kind of be sad about all the other stuff going on. And like, just being on the gram and having to hear about another person, this poor Jacob Blake. Oh my God. It's just
it won't stop.
It's just the re-traumatizing of it all. Like, I just, that on top of, the anxiety that we're all still kind of feeling of not knowing where we're going to go to next, what's happening next, how long are we going to be here, So it's a lot. But I'm feeling much better, much more relieved after kind of letting that out.
Yeah, it sounds like you're feeling better because you chose to feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I have such wonderful people in my life that I can be open about it, you guys, my family, my friends, and
I'm so grateful that you shared today. I didn't know about this period for you until I texted you texted me back, and said that you were having a hard time, and it's like that's really dope. So that I know where you are, I know to be an open ear, and then I think it does just feel better when you share. Yeah, part of the pain. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for your vulnerability in this moment, and especially because this shit ain't just between the three of us, and we got such a good open vibe. But being vulnerable, knowing that X amount of people also would be privy to it, I think is pretty dope.
Super. Just tell me about you, boo.
Let's see. I think this week has been a challenge, and it's only Tuesday.
Right.
Just a lot of big pressing deadlines, a lot of things that I have going on that I'm not used to, and I'm used to like being under pressure, but I just think certain dynamics that's coming into play are a struggle for me, should I say. So I think just taking this opportunity yesterday was really tough for me, coming to a lot of realizations. I'm not a person who, so for the sake of this podcast too, when I'm talking professionalism, just for the folks who don't know, like most of us, my hands are in a mini pot, and the hands are in mini pots. Sokore is my absolute favorite. But
I paid him to say that. I'm just kidding.
But I say that to say, so I'm not talking about any of my clients. This work is actually the most enjoyable part of my professional life. But just work-wise, I'm not a person who values work over me, or values work over like my family, my friends, and this past week, I feel like that's been the case. Had to cancel some trips to meet some deadlines. Barely made it to the Zoom call for my grandma's 94th birthday, and that actually made me hella tearful. Like realizing like that, not that I missed it because maybe I overslept, maybe I was doing something else enjoyable, but like I missed it because of work. Like I don't really give a fuck about work. And again, not talking about my clients here, but in general. I for sure value and prioritize my family, my friends over my professional. So that was tough for me. And not being at home as much with my wife, et cetera, which I know for most people, it's people out here who be like, yeah, we catch each other on the weekends, and that's just not us. That's not a part of our values. That's not a part of our foundation. So spending it though, not necessarily into a positive light, but it's a positive for me. Just thinking through what you said, what did I do with it? I think that I've allowed for it to push me to reflect. I think I've been able to be reminded of like how dope my wife is, and she's hella supportive, and really ready to tag in, like egging me on, pushing me on. Like
she made him a
cheering me.
bomb ass sandwich today.
Hey, that shit was bomb.
I looked at it and knew like that was made with so much love, and so I texted her and said, "Bitch, next time just send me one."
Yeah. So I think just like using it to be a reminder of how dope my wife is, a reminder of my values, so then I can then remind myself that this is temporary. Once, you know, our few short-term goals are met, definitely going back to a much less stressful professional life, whatever that means and looks like.
I know what it looks like. It looks like you guys hosting wine tasting night and me being there drinking with y'all. That's what it looks like. Can we take it back?
So that's what I'm doing with it. Just revisiting my priorities and allowing for it to make me reassess my values list so that I don't get too far away from it, because while the work I'm doing I'm passionate about, it isn't more important than those parts of me. Even we were supposed to hang out and I had to cancel. In general,
bummed. But I
short-term sacrifice. But all that to say, I'm definitely not the nigga who's gonna be canceling my personal shit for work.
We're not slaving for profit. No, we're not. Listening to you two incited a lot of emotions that wanted to like pour out through tears, and I was sitting here like, better not cry on this podcast. Because oh my gosh, I might cry on this podcast. I guess that's okay. Like, I feel what you guys feel. It's a lot, right? I'm so grateful that you guys share. And I think even if you didn't even share that you were stressed, but I knew you were stressed. And so when you came through the door today, I was just like, Tris, how are you? Like, I don't want you to carry this level of stress. And I'm so glad you have the tools that I need to implement to be like, Tristan, his situation is temporary. Like, you actually don't have to worry about him for a long time. And it's not super duper fucked up, but like, when you're struggling, I struggle with you. Like, no, let's get through this. How can we make this better? So I'm grateful to be a part of this. I'm grateful that you have a wife who made you a beautiful sandwich.
Your favorite sandwich maker. New IG alert. And
I'm grateful that we have the tools to be able to manage all of this. Oh no, thank you. I'm good with my hands. So thank you guys for just like opening up.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So now the thing I have to talk about, I could talk about a lot of challenges, but the one I'll talk about is a little more lighthearted just because it's the one that's pressing for me right now. I have indigestion. And it is a motherfucker. I'm like, how does your physical affect? Well, I know this, right? But in the moment, I'm like, why? I feel like total shit because my stomach ain't accurate. Like, some is stuck and it's plugged and it's bloated and it's this and it's that. I went for a run today to try to relieve a jump rope. I feel stuck. And I was telling Rob, like, when I feel like this, I don't feel pretty. I don't feel like I'm attractive. I look like I feel like everything on my body is bloated. And Rob was like, well, you don't look like that. And that's like, this is why it's important to be vulnerable and to share, because you get reality checked. Like, actually, you look the same, maybe even better, right?
Yeah. How we feel on the inside, though, always affects how we feel on the outside. So my perspective is definitely going to be different than yours because I don't know how you feel. Because, I mean, you could be coming from a glamour photo shoot, but if you're not feeling well, you're not gonna see yourself in that same light.
And truth be told, like, if I'm really real with myself, throughout COVID, there's probably been 4 or 5 days where I've actually felt like I looked good. I don't feel like I look bad, but just feeling like you look good. We haven't had many opportunities for that. I went to dinner, what was that, July 5th? I remember the date. I went to Joey downtown LA and I felt gorgeous. I put blush on and eyeliner and mascara and a skirt and a tank top. And it was a nice reminder. Like, we're all missing that, you guys. And that's like an important part of life, to feel good about yourself, to feel like you look good. Yep. So dress up at home, do something nice for yourself. Yeah. Little photo shoot in the bedroom.
Yeah. It's actually that check-in. I don't know if it was intentional, but it was a perfect segue into the topic.
You got a big bitch crying over here.
Can't get more vulnerable than that.
Crying and sharing, and Rob just hit it. We're actually tackling vulnerability today, and vulnerability is so broad, and people use it. But I think that we may think that people use it wrong. People have some misconceptions about it, and my own personal belief, and I don't know if the squad agrees, but vulnerability is for sure the gateway to healing and to true connection and to true growth, whether it's vulnerability with yourself, with others, just in general. you ain't going nowhere if you ain't willing to like really dig deep and open up and get to the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
At least with you, if with nobody else. So
gotta start there.
Yeah, I want to start with
Rob, you were mentioning about the resistance to it is the initial definition we're taught, right?
Yeah, I think that the way that vulnerability has been defined originally is like, if you look it up, it's like a state of weakness. But I think that that's because it's more in the context of like maybe like physical weakness, like if you're smaller than someone, like you're more susceptible to be hurt,
right?
Or like economic vulnerability, like socioeconomic vulnerability. It's like more connected to these I think these macro systems, like when you think about being vulnerable,
it's like weak.
Yeah, it's like a weakness in the sense of like you are more susceptible to being hurt, or like you don't have the resources,
not strong enough,
to protect yourself from certain things. But when we talk about vulnerability, kind of like in our relationships and in therapy, that has a different context to it, because it's more so, I think, about putting yourself in a position to be open about something that could bring on something that could create hurt, but in a way that you kind of are like prepared for,
like calculated vulnerability, perhaps.
Yeah, because in our lifetime, we have these relationships like with family, and that's probably the first place for us to feel vulnerable. Is like, even though if you're a kid, you're crying, and then maybe a parent tells you, or if you're a male and you're crying, like they're telling you, oh, man up, or so here's an opportunity where you were vulnerable. I'm crying, I'm hurt. And then someone kind of muted it. They didn't respond to it in an empathetic way. And so then we start to contort ourselves into a different way to fit into these stronger people's idea of what it looks like to be a strong person. So we're no longer our authentic selves. And I think that just kind of snowballs into like us becoming adults and being scared that if we're vulnerable in these spaces, we're going to receive that type of failure of response or compassion or empathy. And so we continue to disconnect in that way, and it just creates so much fear and dysfunction
and lack of love.
I think about what you just said about vulnerability, and it, in a sense, well, I guess I'm kind of switching and saying it being essentially to people's resistance to it. No, that's what I'm trying to say. Sorry. How you show up in regards to vulnerability also can be reflective of not just your defense mechanisms, kind of to your point. In addition to that, also what was modeled for you. Like, in coming up, how did people deal with tough shit? Like, did you have, you hear people who will say, like, in my house, we didn't really do feelings. Like, everyone just, like,
what a sad house.
Like, we didn't do feelings, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that. Instead, we just kind of kept pushing. Well, that's modeled and learned. So now as you're experiencing things in that same way, you don't know how to deal with it, or maybe this is all you knew. Or culturally, I think as a people, as Black folks, it hasn't always been safe to be vulnerable. And I think that where we haven't always been the greatest at, because I'd be lying if I said that I didn't agree that as we navigate America, it probably hasn't been the safest for us to be vulnerable. But I think amongst one another in our homes, I think we probably often miss the mark where we allowed ourselves or encouraged one another or taught our children, once you're home, like, you solid. Like, you can take you don't have to walk on eggshells anymore. You can just be here. You can just be. And I get that from my own upbringing. That's literally how my mom raises us. Like, don't wear your emotions on the sleeve in the streets. And as soon as you walk through this door, like, there is no walking on eggshells.
Was that a hard line to play?
I think I'll probably say to a certain.
I should say.
To I guess I'd say to a certain extent, yes, because you're in the world so much that you think about it. You're in the world so much, and you're at home so little. So most of the day, it's essentially like you're like in your protective self. So that I think while we always found peace in knowing like home was safe and you could be vulnerable and you could open up, I think you just got so used to being the other way. So it was like hit or miss. Like, I think you just get so used to it that I don't know. But just an example of it's also modeled for us.
I think that I wonder if some people don't respond, quote unquote, appropriately to someone's vulnerability because they don't have words for it. Because if you're not prepared for someone expressing their emotions, that is scary.
Yeah.
either you think you have to fix it, or you think you have to be able to relate, or you dodge the question completely or the issue completely. And I think that we see that.
Yeah.
And so you guys, this is what I do all the time. If you can't do it with yourself, you're not gonna be able to do it for someone else. So we can get into this more later because I want to stay on this topic, but you will have a hard time finding words for other people if you haven't learned how to find words for yourself. Like, when I am sad, what do I say? What do I need? Maybe it's space, maybe it's nothing, whatever. And then you can extend that to other people. Yeah.
Yeah, vulnerability is a wild and such, to me, wild loosely, but like such a wild and complex like topic, and it looks so differently. I'm even just thinking, you know, we talked about vulnerability as in terms of physical safety. I even see that translate over into the therapeutic space, where that's how clients show up, and whether it was physical safety or emotional safety for them, like the safety is the thing, and that's usually fueled by like we've all had a few failed attempts. Like, you opened up with somebody and they burned you. You had a homeboy or homegirl, and now you're like, nope, don't fuck with that no more. You opened up to this person and they. So what do you guys think, or what would you tell people who've had these negative experiences that are reinforcing their idea that it's not safe to be vulnerable? How do you help them move past that?
I see vulnerability as a really helpful tool, because what it helps you do is see who's ready for you. If I am vulnerable with you, and speaking to the calculated piece you were talking about, Robin, if I have chosen to be vulnerable, I've said I'm going into this knowing that I stand to lose. This stands to be used against me. I go in it knowing that, and I go in it more with the intention of seeing if you can carry what I present. Not carry, because don't take it from me, but like, can you work with this, or will you shove this down my face or down my throat? And if you do, that to me tells me I can't be vulnerable with you. Or it tells me I need to have a discussion with you, because this is the thing too. Sometimes people don't know that they fucked you over. They don't know that you were vulnerable and they used it against you, and that you're now hurting. So that's an opportunity for a conversation. Hey, I told you this actually happened to me. Let me give you an example. A family member. So I am trying to be plant-based, okay? Like, in my house. When I leave and there's chicken, I'm gonna eat it. So I'm getting Thistle delivered and I'm loving it. And I was a week and a half in. It was Wednesdays are my Fridays. And I got home on Wednesday and I was watching Black is King, and there was a McDonald's craving, because that happens for me. That is my guilty pleasure. 2 hamburgers, take the bun off the top off and eat it like a tostada kind of. And I posted that on my private IG story. I said, a bitch out here trying to be plant-based but got a McDonald's craving. What's the girl to do? And I posted the next post. I was in the McDonald's drive-thru. So the next day I was having a conversation with family, and I brought up, that if America truly cared about our health, they would do more than masks. They would close down certain restaurants or change the motherfucking menus. And a family member chimed in and was like, wait, but weren't you just at McDonald's yesterday? And I was just like, I think you know what I was saying, and I think you're trying to, I think you joined me actually in my point, but you want to dig at me? So I was sitting there and I was just like, okay, I noticed the tonality of my response. It was negative, and I thought, is this me or is this him? And I thought, no, I've been really supportive of you lately, and I've actively been trying to, and I don't know what I did to you to create you to want to stir me this way. So I said, hey, I don't like when you do that. That was vulnerability for me in that moment. It was like, he might strike me down, whatever. I don't like when you do that. And it wasn't received well, but I knew that. But I did that for me. So that I think is another form of vulnerability, how you can express it. But that's also an example of how the shit can still get turned against you using IG story in your 30s.
And I think that's what the therapy process is for, creating space for vulnerability, and working out all the different ways that can be received, or outcomes that can happen, so that we understand that being vulnerable isn't just about getting the right response. It's about showing ourselves that when we do this, that it's not as scary as we think it is. We're going to survive it.
Yep.
And like you said, it kind of weeds out the people that are not here for what you have to offer. I know for me, personal experiences is that having anxiety for a good majority of my life, I used to be very, very scared to tell men that, like, oh God, here's this girl, she's crazy. Like, what am I going to be dealing with? And even though I think I was doing pretty well at managing it, I knew that it could be debilitating for me and that I would need some sort of support, but I didn't feel comfortable disclosing that to people because I didn't want to seem weak. Even though, you know, in hindsight, I'm like, shit, if people can make it through the type of stuff that I've been through, then they realize how strong I actually am.
That's
but so you know, but then I got to a point where I was just like, you know, when I was treated poorly because of anxiety, and I was like, this doesn't serve me, and to hold and internalize all this stuff just so that I could have somebody to love me and care about me, you know, part of the time, you know what I'm saying? I was like, man, fuck that shit. I was like, that's like, I out the gate with it, like, I have anxiety. Like, look, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. If it's not something that you want to sign up for or you don't feel comfortable with, I'm just letting you know that this is my challenge, and it comes and goes, and I've done the work.
Yeah. And
sometimes it's harder than others. I need certain types of support. This is how I need to be loved and supported through this. And it's like, you know, you have a choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice to make. So now it's like, it makes it much easier for me, because then I get to hear people say, girl, please, that ain't no big deal. And I'm like, oh, okay.
And yeah, I love that. I love that. Vulnerability as a screening or weeding out process, and vulnerability as a source of connection, and vulnerability as a way. I think ultimately what we're saying is vulnerability brings peace. Because the third thing I was going to say is vulnerability. If you operate from vulnerability, is actually just being your authentic self.
Yeah.
Out loud.
Yeah.
Publicly. And when you do that, when you act in accordance with like those little impulses, so those of us who are in relationships and new relationships where you're like afraid to give too much, afraid to do the nicer thing, afraid to tell them how much you like them, like because you held back, it's probably not going to work. And then you're going to have regrets when it doesn't work because you didn't show up as your full self. So vulnerability leads to peace because you have no regrets. I was listening to Destiny's Child. What's that song where she goes, laying around with them raggedy heifers? Basically, she's like, I have peace because I gave it my all. You're never going to get a love like this before again. Like, yeah. So being vulnerable, being who you are truly, authentically helps you to, if it didn't work, it's because it wasn't going to work. The real you in that didn't work. So you can walk away with peace versus having regret.
And even if that's in romantic partnerships or not, I'm thinking romantically, and I may have said this on an earlier episode, but that's how I showed up. And hearing you say it, of course, it makes me happy. I was like, oh, I've been vulnerable and didn't know. And sometimes we're operating in vulnerability. It's not always this like intentional decision. Like sometimes it just happens. And sometimes that bites you in the ass. Sometimes it is like that calculator, like I'm going to be vulnerable. But when Shamila and I started dating, I think like a couple of days in, I was like, just so you know, I don't compete. I don't play games. Because I spent so many years, you know, to your point, you know, to your point, you're like trying to do this dance and play these games. And yeah, the cognitive level, you know, like I shouldn't say cognitive, like being a part of that generation and like our generation, we know people go and date multiple people. It's not exclusive. They could do what they want. They can do all of those things. And not always, but when I really liked someone, I was still trying to like fit in this, like, oh, you do you, like you do. And it was fucking with me. And I was like, by the time she showed up, it was like, either this is going to work or not. Like I'm choosing me, and I'm choosing not to put myself through the unknowns. And when I hit you, is it a good time? Or are you on a date this time?
The unnecessary stress.
All of that, instead of just saying like,
that's
yo,
energy.
This is what I am. And thanks, Boost, for taking the bait. But but had it not, I guess like you said, it wasn't meant to be, and I'm just happy it did. But it wanted to make me touch on one point, which is like the myths that's associated with vulnerability. And I think that biggest one is that vulnerability means like laying it all out on the table to everyone. And I think it's kind of the opposite. I think it's being, like you said, and maybe this will shift into like that internal vulnerability with self, but first being vulnerable with self and knowing self well enough that you trust that this is an individual you can be vulnerable with, or like you said, to that calculated, even if you don't necessarily trust them, you're making a decision to. I think people often hear vulnerability, and even some of my clients in session, it comes up and it's like, I don't do vulnerability. I don't do it. And it's like,
Good luck.
Well, not trying to be funny, but that's also why you're here, because you don't do vulnerability. So I'm sure if you're not doing it with others, it's because you don't do it with yourself. So you're just stuck in this cycle of denial versus being like, yo, like, I got some shit that's fucked up, and if I work through it, maybe I would feel better. So,
and that's hurt speaking, by the way. This I don't do vulnerability stuff. That's just
because I've been hurt every time I have been, or something like that.
Yeah, at some point in my life, I was open with someone, or even as a small child, like I was saying, like being hurt, being sad, and then someone telling or someone dismissing you or feeling unheard in a situation where you should have received.
That's where I see vulnerability as me choosing to live life freely as my true authentic self, in the freest form of myself, knowing that this shit can come back and blow up on me. But I love me enough that I'm not willing to deny me, so I'm going to operate as me. And if it blows up in my face, it blows up.
But I think you're speaking to the piece that your clients don't have, who can't be vulnerable. What they're saying is, I think what's happening is when you have these negative experiences with vulnerability, you believe what the person told you about what you said that was vulnerable. You believe that your feelings don't matter, that you're not important, and then you carry that. Yeah. And what you're saying is you don't carry that. You carry the belief
I try not to, but I'm saying, like, I think truly vulnerable people, like, in learning vulnerability, you learn not to carry that.
Correct. You learn that what you say and feel and think matter, regardless of what anyone has to say about it.
And those that don't do vulnerability, they stay in that cycle and they keep creating disconnects in all of their relationships, and then that leads to a lot of self-doubt, self-blame. I was telling you this earlier about relational cultural theory.
Yes.
Jean Baker Miller, where she talks about how the dysfunction of these type of relationships where a person doesn't get the response that they're supposed to get from being vulnerable. And so then they can no longer show up as their authentic self. And so they keep modifying bits and pieces until they're no longer the person that they actually are. And so they get into this paradox of like being longing for relationships and then also being terrified of them because I don't know how much I'm going to have to change myself. And sometimes, like, people who are at that point, therapy is so useful because this is your first relationship where somebody can allow you to be vulnerable, give you the response that you're looking for.
It's reparative.
Right. And it comes from more of a mutual empowerment. So it's like, I'm going to show you how to be vulnerable. That's what I do with clients like that in my sessions, is like, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to disclose something to you about myself that would be a vulnerable thing, so that it kind of creates, like, changes the power dynamic where it's like, hey, I'm just like you. I've got challenges. I've got things that could open me up for pain or for hurt if somebody knew that. But I'm sharing that with you, and in turn they are able to kind of share and then get that response of empathy back.
Therapy is the model,
right?
Where you get to learn the healthy way to do it.
Right.
I love that. Here's what we know: we need to do better with vulnerability. We know that we carry a strong outer shell outside of the home, and I think that this is a calling. This is a calling from Soko Ray therapy therapists to move differently, to try to open up, to try to say something that you feel. And this is a calling for the person who's on the receiving end of the vulnerable message. Allow space. Practice just listening. Try not to respond negatively. Be open to the experiences of another person, even if you don't agree. Try to see what the meaning is behind what it is that they're saying. I was talking to a client yesterday, and he was talking about this girl he's dating, and, you know, it's 2 days out. They had some funky text messages, and he's like, you know what, I might just ghost her. I said, we don't do that shit. No client of mine will ghost. We're not doing that. You're afraid to be vulnerable. You're afraid to say, I think you've checked out. Or I'm not really liking that last text. I feel like you're disengaged. If we fear addressing what's going on within us, we will stay without the things that we want. Get after it.
And I know, speaking from my own experience, in hearing what you said, that's absolutely vulnerability. I've been like a classic ghoster, and not just ghosting in terms of
not a
dating.
Ghost.
I couldn't see it. I can't see it.
Not just ghosting. Well, one, I should, and I guess that's something, like, hopefully through this podcast, people are able to hear it and listen and see, if you're watching, vulnerability in action. Like, when we share our personal stories and our personal journey, that's vulnerability. Acknowledging that we don't know who's listening, who's on the other side, and we're still choosing to be open. This whole show, while of course we study, we know our shit, this show is rooted in our professional opinions, our opinions informed by our professional experience, our educational training, and our personal. So in essence, this podcast is vulnerability. It's
for sure.
Maybe a therapist is out there and they're like, nope, not that shit, or whatever. Like, who knows? But so I'd say that to say, going back to me in my vulnerable moment, I wanted to share to everyone that I've have a tendency to be avoidant, like as it comes to like conflict, because either I want to be enraged, like where I'm ready to blow up, or I would just rather avoid it altogether. So my work has been learning like how to navigate that middle. But in that's often fueled like just the ghosting behavior, because it essentially is, you get to skip out on that tough conversation. Ooh. You get to skip out on whatever the backlash is, or that, and not just for the person, but for yourself, like that stomach churning. That if I just ghost, then I don't really have to deal with it. I don't, and of course in growth, you can look back and be like, exactly what you said, that's fucked up. That not only impacted this person, but also was I denying a part of myself, because in ghosting, maybe there was something else unsaid, or who knows. Mm-hmm. But
and you're reinforcing that anxiety, mm-hmm. so you're making that fear grow. Mm-hmm. So the next time it's you're even more avoidant, because you're like,
stop ghosting.
So we talk about.
I didn't know I was working with Casper over here.
Disrespect.
We're talking about ghosting, but I intentionally use that example because I think avoidance is a huge sign that you probably aren't being your truest vulnerable self, if you are avoiding. So I'd encourage you to
like that.
Sit with, what is it that I'm avoiding? Why am I avoiding this? Why is it giving me, like for me, I get like the gut wrenching feeling. I know everyone, things show up physiologically different for different people, but me, it's like the gut to chest. Like I'm learning like this is where something is kind of off. So you sit with it, you figure out where you feel it, try to explore like, man, what's really causing this? Like why am I scared? Because that's essentially what you feel at first. It's like, oh, I'm scared. It just makes me nervous. Or we mask it with like, I don't even give a fuck enough to deal with it. I'm just, and there are some things where you don't get your energy to, but a lot of times that is been avoided and we just mask it in turn. So essentially, just encouraging everyone to become familiar with your responses. That was an example that I'm giving of my own, but hopefully people can pick up and recognize that avoidance. And that's just one of many, and it can come up and show up in different ways, shapes, form, and fashion. But I'd say, I always tell my clients that awareness is half the battle. First, you have to become aware of what you're feeling, where you're feeling it, even learn how it shows up, because it's like a far stretch to just be like, oh, don't be avoiding, be more open. What if I don't even know my process of not being avoidant or whatever? So
you can't just be vulnerable. You have to first check.
As I develop that awareness, my barriers to it, I can start to work through those, and I can start to learn, and you can work your way to a more vulnerable space. And I guess if I had to ask a question, what would you guys say if a person said, I've had a whole bunch of shitty experiences, I'm really struggling to like try again? Is it like challenging? Like what's your intervention if it's like
So I'm acting like I'm in a session right now, and that just came up, and my first thought would be, tell me some of the things you've been wanting to say but been afraid to say, like right here with me. Let's practice this. What response? So before you tell me the thing, I want you to tell me the response you think you're going to get based on your history, and then I want to tell you how I would actually respond. So let's role play this out. That would be one way.
I agree with. I'm kind of on the same page with you as far as that is concerned. I also return vulnerability. I disclose and do things like that to show, like, how are you responding to my vulnerability? You know what I mean? What would you say to me? And then, their response is usually a healthy, nice response. And it's like, okay, so if you're responding that way to me and you don't know me, we're just kind of like having a conversation that, what are the chances that this could happen for you, even if you've had other experiences that haven't worked out that way. You know what I mean? Like, here's an opportunity to see that your response to my vulnerability is a possibility. This wasn't, this came from your own head, your own mind. So that sounds like that's how you'd like to be responded to. And maybe going back to this idea of kind of like using that as a discerning factor in your relationships. Now you can see like, okay,
he ain't ready.
Someone was vulnerable with me, and this is how I naturally responded. So there's got to be people out here that are like that, you know, and maybe it's diving deeper into like the people that I'm coming into contact with, like what's my environment, like
who am I choosing?
What are the themes, you know, things like that, and then we can find other reasons why you might be encountering this type of person, you know.
I've been on a roll lately in my sessions. I don't know. There's been the theme of them feels like it's been, what have we tied our worth to? And I think it was birthed, even though the conversation was about relationships. I think it was from a couple of episodes back, Whole as Fuck. And I think transferring, I know the gym you pretty much dropped, or what you were focusing on was essentially being whole just within yourself, outside of relationships. And I think I've been encouraging people to apply that to all things. Detach your self-worth from your job, from your family, from all of these things. And I'm mentioning this now because I think the more we learn to detach and just tie our worth to our inner selves, and to learn to be grounded in who we are, and to learn that we're enough, and just me and my essence, I am enough. Me and my essence, I deserve to take up space. I deserve to be here. Like, once I can sit with and acknowledge those things, I think some of the fear in being vulnerable starts to subside, because that's what that fear is. Like, what will this person think of me? And I struggle to believe that that's not somehow some part of you feeling like your worth is in somehow, some way linked to that. Like, if Rob don't like what I say, what does that say about me? If Soko shuts me down, what does it say? Versus I'm solid all in and of myself. So if they don't agree, I can be receptive, like in terms of listening, we can have a conversation, but I'm not taking it on as an attack on me, because I already know who the fuck I am.
Right. It's not rejection. It's just weeding out. Yeah, that's real good.
I wanna quickly, before we like move on and get to all our strategies and things, I want to call out the people who take pride in saying, I'll cut a person off real quick. Because those are people that struggle with vulnerability. You know, we kind of like encourage this. I see this on social media all the time, where it's like, I'm cutting everybody off at 2020, whatever year it is.
It's like, have a nice life alone.
I'm like, you still cutting people off? Like, you might want to check on that. I mean, you might want to,
work through that.
You the common denominator in that situation.
Burned everybody.
So I'm just saying, like, if you keep having to cut people off, what's happening there? Like, to me, that sounds like, instead of me having a healthy conversation or being vulnerable with people, I am choosing to practice avoidance. I'm choosing to not deal with the discomfort of getting past that hump in a relationship that maybe might serve me. Because something they did made me uncomfortable, and it could be anything. We have no idea. Half the time I hear this, I don't know what the issue is, but it's like, I'm quick. I don't do that. I'm quick to cut somebody off, but it's like, for what? You know, why is that? Why is there so much pride in that statement?
I hear that a lot too, and it bothers me as well. I mean, it sometimes means you shouldn't have dealt with it anyway. So yes, you should cut off, but sometimes it's like you just actually don't want to work through things. So good luck. I would just like to chime in again to say that I think it's on the receiver as well. So what I would like to see everyone listening or hear about, everyone who's listening to this, those of you who are sharing your vulnerability, your vulnerable moment, I would like for you to prep the listener by saying, I'm practicing being more vulnerable, and this is a moment I'm choosing to do this in with you. And I hope that what I share isn't received poorly. And I hope that you can hold space for me and not make me feel wrong for how I feel or what I say. And I'd like to grow with you in this way. And then the recipient saying like, wow, recognizing that this is a privileged moment and operating with it as such is what I would like to see. So I challenge you all to do that. Okay, ready to go.
Absolutely. I mean, unless you guys have more, I kind of felt like we was dropping our skills throughout.
I think we're solid.
So,
but
who we highlighting?
Well, before we get to the highlights, I wanted to encourage y'all out there, if anyone is struggling with being vulnerable, if anyone is still even like, what the fuck is vulnerability, if anyone has success stories, negative stories, whatever it is, as always, hit us in our DMs, Hill and Chill AF on IG. We'd love to hear from you guys, hear from y'all more, hear y'all stories, hear what y'all going through. So
forgive us if we're delayed in responding. Only one of us can be logged in at one time, and we have a lot of other things we're working on, but we will get to you.
Thanks for all the comments. Like, I've been throwing up some prompts and stuff and getting some great feedback. It's just really helpful for us in knowing what you're engaged in. Some really good feedback on some of our past episodes.
We
so
got a lot of y'all listening, and you guys listen for the whole show too. So thank you.
Unless y'all got somebody.
Brene Brown.
I was just finna say.
Vulnerability. You gotta drop Brene Brown.
I was just finna say we finna take it to Brene Brown if y'all ain't got no. But check out any of her work, any of her books, anything you just Google. That is like the vulnerability guru, and I think that she's able to express it in a way where you absolutely don't have to be a therapist. You can be an everyday person. So you can follow her at Brene Brown.
I think it's at Brene Brown. Brene, last name Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's dope.
On IG,
she's got her TED Talk is what took her to the next level. Look up the TED Talk, Brene Brown vulnerability, and then she's got tons of literature, and she's a dope ass person. We fucks with her because she's a social worker
and she's vulnerable as fuck.
Hey.
Mm-hmm. So what are we leaving out with on our gym?
Be vulnerable. Stop all this hiding and cutting. Knock that shit off. Is that good enough? Something else?
That's good enough to me. I mean, I don't know what else.
Just do it.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I was watching episode 3 of what's it called? Michael Jordan's the Bulls series that's on Netflix right now. The Last Dance. Thank you. I thought that was the name. Episode 3. I was watching Dennis Rodman. I forgot how dope he is. He fucked up. Jordan was pissed, and instead of saying sorry, he went to Jordan's hotel room and asked him for a cigar. Jordan knew what that meant, but I push you guys to be a little different than Rodman and say that you're sorry rather than just asking for the cigar. Let's push ourselves a little farther. That was also a beautiful moment, but I'm challenging everyone to move a little different now.
Yep.
Next generation shit.
And on that note, we out.
Peace.
This has been an Inclusive Media Podcast Studios production.